Let's dive into it. I was mentioning Joe Biden's presidential win could be bad for U.S. equities, but good for other markets. That's what Mark Mobius, Mobius Capital Partners co-founder, told Bloomberg last week, saying, quote, the so-called wealth effect will be at play in the U.S. if the people who invest in the stock market expect that their wealth will be hit with higher taxes. They will restrain from investing. He joins us now from Dubai. Mark, good to talk to you. The thing that was different, though, on come Saturday was that we're going to have a divided government. Do you change your call?
No, I think this will still be the case because they're going to try. I think the Democrats will try their best to raise taxes for the wealthy, the people that are invested in the stock market. However, what the change that's taken place in the last few days was this discovery of a vaccine that works. And of course, that's complicating this picture because on the one side, we may be bearish with this president in terms of his tax policies, but on the other side, we're getting benefits on the vaccine, so that this is a very happy scenario for a lot of people if they're able to solve this COVID-19 crisis. But nevertheless, I believe emerging markets will probably do better simply because the US dollar index is not doing so well. And a lot of these currencies, particularly currencies in Asia, in Korea, in Taiwan, China, are doing better against the US dollar. So that will move people over into these markets and to other emerging markets. As you mentioned, Turkey is another one that may be popping up in terms of better performance.
Mark, I was thinking about this before we started this conversation, and one thing occurred to me, and I don't know whether this is necessarily going to turn out to be true, but I'm wondering if there's a sequence effect in terms of those that are likely to get the vaccine first. And I'm assuming that those are likely to be the developed markets that have the money to buy the vaccines and have secured the supplies. And as a result of which, the economic uplift is going to come there first. Is there an argument against some emerging markets that they are not going to get the vaccine as early as others, and as a result of which the economic consequences are likely to remain more negative for them for longer?
Well, if you look at emerging markets generally, they have young populations. So their resistance to COVID-19 is higher than the developed markets where the age factor is very, very important. So I think there's a balancing. Yes, on the one side, emerging markets may not get all the vaccines they need. But on the other side, they're much more resistant because of the younger population. But nevertheless, I don't think the real picture is related to whether there's a vaccine that gets into people's arms, so to speak, if they get vaccinated. It's more the picture of a vaccine being available. And that's what makes people very optimistic. So I think the picture looks very, very good beginning next year. As I mentioned many times, I think we're going to have a V-shaped recovery. And I think it's based on the fact that this COVID-19 fear will be over.
Something that, though, happened over the last couple of days, in particular with Chinese tech stocks, was the government coming out and saying, you guys are too big, basically doing something out of the blue that Europe and the U.S. have in some ways been flirting with it, regardless of COVID. What did you make of that and then the sell-off?
I think globally there is a trend in Europe, in the U.S., of course, in China and other countries, towards regulating these very, very big internet companies who have become very, very powerful and really have become powerful in the back of not being regulated in any direction compared to their competitors, people they're taking market share away from. So I think this is going to continue. Doesn't mean these companies are not going to have lower profits or are going to fail in any direction, but I believe the valuations will begin to be threatened in some of these stocks.
Mark, I want to pull it all together. You're worried about a Biden administration, but you're hopeful about a vaccine. We've got to get to a vaccine, obviously, is one question that arises out of that. You're worried about tech, and you're worried the valuations are going to change. A lot of markets are heavy with tech, particularly in the United States. So where are you? Do you think that the highs are in, for instance, for US markets for this year? Would you be a buyer or seller? I'm curious as to your positioning right now.
My positioning is to be a holder in U.S. stocks and very selectively buying those stocks that have been really bombed out as a result of this COVID-19. Now, I agree this is a risky bet, but companies like people that are in the shipping business, in the cruise business, that is a very interesting play. Another one is theaters, would be another one. These are companies that are completely bombed out, and with the end of COVID-19, they will recover dramatically. But having said that, I think exposure to those stocks in the US will be very interesting, but then emerging markets will do better, particularly on the technological infrastructure. And by that, I mean the stocks that are involved in producing chips, the kinds of things that you need in cloud operations. So all of the infrastructure stocks that are companies like semiconductor companies would be a good example, where the demand for their semiconductors is going up at a very fast pace. So that's, I think, an area that we should look at very carefully.
Do you foresee the U.S. and China continuing to decouple under a Biden presidency? Do you see tariffs rolling off? Does none of that matter if you're playing more the consumer side to some extent?
You know, the interesting thing is that China's gone from strength to strength, even during the pressure that Trump has placed on them. As you can see, their balance of payments is growing, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, with the good relations that the new administration, Biden, has with China, things should be very, very good. In fact, I would say China is a winner in this election as well.
Okay, that's interesting. A lot of people would go the other way because they don't really see the Biden administration radically shifting the policy, which is really one of the few, very few, across the aisle issues in Washington, D.C. That does actually genuinely bring everybody together. Why do you think that China is going to continue to benefit under that kind of environment? Do you think that with a tax pushback happening, with a tariff pushback happening, with China taxing its or pushing back against its own tech companies, why do you think that China is going to be a place that you want to be investing? Again, why aren't the highs in there?
Well, first of all, you must remember that the rhetoric, the Biden rhetoric, is not going to be like the rhetoric we've heard with Trump. Biden will talk about coming together, about peace in the world, about international collaboration, et cetera, et cetera. This is all very good for China, because that's what China has been talking about as well. So that's a very important thing to remember. The other thing is that, yes, the Chinese are going to be cracking down on these big internet companies, but they're certainly not going to stop developing their technology. So you find that the Chinese are beginning to move into some of the more finer aspects of semiconductors and chip production. And that's going to make a big, big difference globally, because they're going to take a bigger market share in that area. So it's going to be interesting to see how they develop. For example, operating systems. I think Microsoft will be challenged by the Chinese in their operating systems. Doesn't mean that Microsoft is going to decline, but I think they're going to get challenged around the world with Chinese programs. The same thing with Apple. They're going to be challenged in the smartphone. Already they're being challenged. So we're going to see a lot more interesting competition globally in all of these areas.